My name's Julie Creffield and I'm the founder of a company called Too Fat to Run. And it started out as a blog called The Fat Girl's Guide to Running. And I set up my blog the day after coming dead last in a race. And actually, I was so slow in the race. By the time I got to the finish line wasn't there anymore. And neither was anybody else. And that's kind of how my blog was born. I started the blog in 2005. It's come an awful long way since. I'm now seen as a global expert when it comes to plus size fitness. I've appeared on TV, I've given talks internationally, and I now work as a motivational speaker. I have clients all over the world that buy into my online programs. I've spoke at parliamentary commissions on inactivity, but it hasn't always been this way. And what I'd like to talk to you today about is not necessarily statistics or an academic view on legacy, but more about my own personal journey and my personal legacy of being involved in the Games, and to perhaps ask questions about how people's personal experiences of an event change their lives, and how our collective memories of things do the same. So this was me back in 2005. I was volunteer coordinator for the London Borough of Newham. So this was during the bid phase, and my job was to try and encourage local people to give up their time to help back the bid. Now, it wasn't the easiest job in the world, and I used to go to lots of kind of presentations and try to get people involved, and there was a lot of scepticism around the Games. And I think I went on to do work with LOCOG around volunteer policy and how we made the Games Maker programme inclusive, and how we got people who would never normally think about volunteering to think about volunteering. And I figured that if you got the people that were least likely to want to get involved, then everybody else would follow suit. So I just thought I'd give you a little bit of background as to kind of, as I said, I'm not an academic. I come from a very working class family. My granddad was a docker. All of my uncles are in the building trade. All of my aunties were either carers or factory workers. I was the first person to go to university from my family. And I can remember being in the car on the way to Winchester, which is where I went to uni, and driving through Stratford and looking out and realising what a poignant moment that was, and that my life was never going to be the same. And I can remember the first time I said to my mum that I might go to uni, and she went, well, who do you think is going to pay for that? So it just gives you a bit of kind of social context as to, where I am now in my life and in my career, as opposed to kind of where I was a long, long time ago. And I think as a young person growing up in Newham, I lived in East Ham and then Forest Gate, I was quite fearful about becoming a nobody. And that sounds a bit dramatic, but I am quite dramatic. And I still kind of hold on to that kind of belief. It's sometimes quite difficult as a young person growing up in an area like Newham to get inspiration and to see people that come from the background that you come from achieving things that you don't even know are possible. And I think during the course of the Olympics, working pre-bid, during Games time and then afterwards, it's really helped me to navigate my own life and my own kind of career. And those are some of the things that I'm going to talk about today. So this gives you a real kind of plotted history of some of the programmes that I worked on. I never set out to work on the Games. I actually can't remember watching an Olympic Games before I got my first Games job. I wasn't particularly sporty at school. I think the only sport I ever watched on TV was ice skating. And I managed to do a lot of different jobs over the years. I worked on Games-related programmes probably for about 12 years. And I'm going to talk about a couple of programmes that really kind of changed things for me around kind of how I work, and I guess how it's ultimately led to where I am today, running the business that I do today. So I'd never done any running before, and in Newham in about 2005 there was a programme called Community Fit Club, and the idea was we'd work with people that don't normally do fitness, and a colleague of mine in the sports team said, Julie, we need some volunteers for this Community Fit Club. Will you come? And by the way, we're asking all members of staff to take part in the 3K fun run. Will you do it? So I said, okay, I'll do it. I'd never done any running before, and I almost died of exhaustion and embarrassment. And some little kid in Beckton Park shouted, "Run, fat girl, run." or some words to those effects. And I sat in my car afterwards and cried. I was so embarrassed. But it was a real wake-up call for me, not necessarily because he called me fat, but because it was such a difficult task. I was in my 20s, my health wasn't that great. To not be able to run 3K was a real kind of wake-up call. So a few months later, the Olympics was being announced, whether we got the bid or not. We were over by the station, and I said to my friends in the sports team, if we get the games, I'm going to run the marathon in 2012. And they all laughed. I mean, they really, really laughed. They thought it was the funniest thing ever because I was hugely overweight. I didn't enjoy sport. My pastimes were drinking and raving, and that was about it, basically. But of course, we did get the games, and I did go on to run my first marathon. I've run 3 marathons since. I've probably run about 30 half marathons. I now travel all over the world, taking part in races and writing about them. And that was just the start of my journey, really. My blog was never supposed to become a business. It was just my personal journey through running. And I wrote the blog alongside lots of other projects that I was working on. So this was a programme called the Legacy Now Youth Panel, which I worked on for about 3 years. And what this panel did was it took young people from the 5 host boroughs, brought them together and got them thinking about kind of what the post-Olympic park might be like. So they got to look at kind of master plans, and they got to think about employment and health and housing and things like that. And I think it was relatively easy to get young people thinking about the games. But again, it was really conceptual. How do you get somebody who lives in a very specific area, maybe on an estate, to think about what this Olympic park might look like and how their lives might be different? So I might be working with a 13-year-old who by games time might be in their early 20s and having to think about housing. When you're a 13-year-old, you don't need to think about those things. So it's an interesting yet challenging programme. And what we did with the youth panel is we would work really intensely with those guys and then get them to disseminate what they'd learned to the wider kind of community of young people. And we did a big event in Hackney where they tried to bring alive this idea of what the vision of the post-Olympic legacy park would be. And I know a lot of these young people have gone on to have fantastic careers, and I think being part of that panel really helped them to express themselves and gave them the confidence to go for jobs and to go on to college and things like that. Now, working with slightly older people, when I say older, I actually mean kind of pensioners and kind of people of that age, was a lot more challenging. And I used to work for Redbridge Council. I was the Olympic Development Manager there. And I'd been going around to all these different community groups talking about what my vision was for what we were going to do in Redbridge. And I got I got like a real letter. And when you're a council officer and you get a real letter, you know it's going to be bad news. And it was a letter from the chair of the Redbridge Pensioners Forum. And they said, we feel excluded. Nobody's talking to us about the Olympics. It's all about young people. It's all about sport. What about us? So I went along to this meeting that they held, and there was about 100 really quite old people. And I was thinking, what the hell am I going to do with you guys? I want to engage you, but what can we do? So I promised that we would have something just for them. And I asked them to give me their ideas and stuff like that, but they wasn't really too sure. And I went away and I had a brainwave. I thought to myself, what would it be like to have 100 pensioners dancing to Chariots of Fire as part of the opening ceremony? So we created something called the Golden Years Dance Troupe. And we never quite made it to the opening ceremony, but this group of older people did do a tour of Redbridge during games time, and they become local celebrities. It was a fantastic dance programme. Some of these older people were really excluded. They didn't feel like there was anything in the borough for them to take part in. Many of them reported their health improving, kind of things like depression, and they had a goal. There was two people from that programme that I kind of inherited them as my kind of grandparents, because they were just really, really lovely. And that was Joan and Jerry. And Joan and Jerry were in their 70s, and they come along to the pensioners thing every month just for a reason to get out of the house, really. And they got completely into the Olympics. And in they become volunteers on our volunteer programme. And Jerry, at the end of the training session, come along and he slipped me this piece of paper, and I thought, what's that? It was a ticket from the 1948 games. Somebody had given him a ticket as a child and he'd gone along. So he already had this story, he had this narrative, he had this kind of experience of what the Olympics could do. And yet all of these years later, he was willing to give that a go. And he became a London ambassador and got to meet Boris Johnson and did all sorts of kind of really exciting things, him and his wife. And it's just kind of a really nice story, really. I've written a lot of kind of blog posts about Olympic legacy, and I was looking this morning at kind of some of my really, really old posts, and I came across this, which was kind of like a vision that I had for the work that I was doing. So probably about 3 years ago, I went on an England athletics training course, because I've got no qualifications in running. I'm not an official running coach. So I went along on this kind of one-day course, and at the end of the course, you had to say what your goal was in terms of what you was going to do with this qualification. And I stood up and I said I want to be the world's leading expert on plus-size running. And again, people kind of chuckled and thought I was just being stupid. But actually, that was my goal. That's what I wanted to do. And I also wrote this vision statement around kind of what I wanted to do with my job. And it's really difficult to kind of be so ambitious when, really what you've got is a tiny little blog that a few hundred people read. But actually, this was written probably about 3 years ago, and visiting it today has made me think, actually, I have achieved that. And I think perhaps that's what the Olympics did for many people, is that it gave you a sense of there's something coming in the future. We don't know what that might look like, but if we get our mindset in the right place, then things might improve, things might get better. So just briefly kind of what the Fat Girl's Guide to Running is. It started off as a blog, and then literally a week after the opening ceremony happened, I got made redundant from my Olympics job. Like literally, within about 3 or 4 days, I was, told that my job was not going to be. So after working on the Games for 12 years, like that, it was taken away from me. I also happened to be pregnant with my first child at the time, so it was a huge kind of shock. By that point, I was so into the Games, and it was really difficult living in Stratford, having it all happen around me, knowing that kind of my life was quite uncertain. So I took a bit of a break and to think about kind of what I wanted to do with my career. And by that point, people had really kind of started to engage with what I was writing about. And I thought, let me see if I can turn this into a business. And that's what I've done. So I now have clients all over the world. I have an online running club, and running in the UK is a big sport. There's already huge infrastructure. And if you were to ask one of the governing bodies, in terms of England Athletics or Sport England perhaps, they would say they've got it under control and that they already engage women, and they already make their programmes inclusive. And I would argue, if they do, how comes I've got so many followers of people that wouldn't go to a traditional running club but will come to me? So I've built a number of kind of online programmes, and I think I'm looking at kind of innovative ways of using technology and mindset and kind of how you tell stories to help people change their lives. And I think these are some of the things that I learned during kind of Games time. And it was interesting, in this morning's session, you could almost believe that there was propaganda and kind of all these kind of marketing ploys, and I just think sometimes people do need to be sold a story. They do need to be given a dream, something to believe in, so that they can make that kind of mindset leap. And one of the things I do with my women in my online running club is I get them to think about big, fat, stupid goals. And big, fat, stupid goals are huge in terms of their scale. So when I said I wanted to run a marathon and I couldn't even run like a 3K run, that was huge. It was such a big space and big step for me to go. But it's made me shift how I look at life, and it's made me kind of achieve a lot more in my life than I would have done if I'd simply said, oh, well, maybe I'll go for a 5K. And so I'm always getting people to kind of think about the scale. And on a daily basis, I ask myself these 3 questions, and I ask my ladies to think about these 3 questions as well. So thinking about kind of what do I want to do, what do I want to be, and what do I want to have, and that helps me to kind of just think about kind of the stories that we're told around who we should be. I'm a working class girl from Forest Gate. I'm not supposed to be travelling the world telling stories, and I'm not supposed to be making money online. And we tell ourselves these stories, and sometimes we hold ourselves back because of them. So talking about inspiration, I've met loads of really kind of inspirational runners over the years. I've met Paula Radcliffe a number of times, and she's very, very nice. She's always a little bit baffled by me. I've worked out she runs marathons 3 times faster than me, but I'm 4 times fatter, so I think that makes me the stronger runner. But it's really interesting how women are inspired, and a lot of women tell me that yes, they love watching sport on TV, but actually they feel much more inspired by their neighbour that's running or somebody at their kids' school than they do kind of these kind of celebrities that we put up there as kind of role models. Another thing that I work with my ladies is something called the Go in the Distance system. And this is it's kind of a system that I've kind of put together, which I often give in my talks about kind of how I've managed to achieve quite interesting things in my life. Probably haven't got time to go through it properly, but I think facing your fear is a kind of huge part of that. And I used to be really fearful of giving talks. I used to like shake and go red and not be able to do it. And now people say to me, "Oh, Julie, you're really fearless." And I'm not. I am fearful all the time, but I still do the things that I'm scared of. And one of the things on my list for this year of things that I wanted to achieve was to do stand-up comedy. And in 2 weeks' time, I'm doing stand-up comedy at the Theatre Royal in Stratford East. I am really scared, but it's a dream, it's an ambition, and I'm working really hard to create a kind of 5-minute comedy sketch based on kind of the realities of being a plus-size runner. I have no idea if I'm going to be funny or if people are going to boo. Apparently the audience, as comedy clubs go, the audience in Stratford are not very nice. That's what the organiser told me. But I always say, what's the worst that could happen? You know, I just go home and cry for a bit. So yeah, I think you really have to kind of face your fears. And then again this morning, when I was putting kind of the finishing bits of the slides, I was thinking, what was the thing that all the way through the games kind of helped me to kind of make sense of it all? And I can remember when I worked at Newham, which was my first Olympic job, having to always go back to the Olympic and Paralympic values. So for probably about 8 years, I was using those values every day as a kind of a touching point. You know, is my programme inclusive? Is it this? Is it that? But then this morning, I couldn't remember what they were. I was like, I have to Google this. I can't remember. And I used to know them off by heart. And then when I looked at these values, I thought to myself, this is what I'm doing now. These values are what drive me to do the programmes that I run. So I put this list on my online running club and I said, these are the Olympic and Paralympic values. Do they remind you of anything? And I got all of these comments from my ladies that say, this is what our programme is about. This is what Two Factor Run is all about. So I think I'm going to leave it there. I think legacy is about personal experiences and collective memories, and I think that shift in local people is really hard to measure. It's really intangible, but it's so important that we don't forget those really exciting moments and those people that have changed their lives as a result of the games. It's not necessarily all about the things that can tick boxes around social housing and physical legacy. I think what goes on inside people's hearts can be far more transformational.
Thank you very much.